enthusiasm for this session and generally towards privacy and data protection. Just as an introduction, I'm Shivangi. I'm an associate in the privacy and policy team here at DSCI. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Mr. Vinayak Godse, CEO of DSCI, to set the context for this event and to really set the tone for why this event and this campaign lies at the heart of the mandate of DSCI, which is privacy and data protection and security. So Vinayak, sir, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Shivangi. Thank you, entire DSA team, for setting up this event and all the speakers joining in for today's celebration and all the participants joining over the weekend for this interaction, basically. So this Data Privacy Day, I think since 2012, 13, Data Security Council of India had been trying to promote and probably celebrate this Privacy Day. And there are different ways. I remember when we started doing this in 2012, 13, privacy was such a greenfield subject that time. Very few people in India would be qualified themselves as term themselves as a privacy professional. But now in last almost 10 years of time, we see privacy profession had definitely gained a ground in this country, basically. So, and we are happy that DSA to certain extent has able to contribute to development of privacy profession in this country. And this profession within the organization has been definitely playing a role of helping organization to understand the privacy legislation and privacy uh, compliance, and more importantly, set up a privacy program and also try to revitalize the processes, product, and operations for the purpose of privacy. While playing that role in the organization, they are also contributing to the discussion and deliberations of privacy as well. So the data privacy do is yes, this is we see from the context of the industry is like to make the industry more responsible, accountable for the purpose of privacy. Try to bring the sense of data protection in the work that we do. Here, as we always had been deliberated, here the challenge mostly is within the organization, right? And whereas the protection that you have to offer is to somebody out of the organization, basically, right? And you are the one who are making the plans. You are the one who are thinking about collecting the data for very different purposes, and we are trying to find opportunities to collect as much of data as we can collect, and we are trying to find the opportunity whatever data we have with us for last so many years, making use of that data, basically. And in the process, we are also collecting data in different functions, process, and services that we have. And the way the entire digital economy is going, so we are increasingly interdependent on a lot of third parties. So a lot of those external providers, we have been trying to use the capabilities delivered all across the globe, and we are trying to make it sure that we use those capability for the whatever digitization and innovation ideas that we have, basically. And that is why the open data ecosystem, which is now becoming norm of the every business that we deal with, basically. And that open data ecosystem also involves significant amount of personal data flowing from organization own boundary to other boundaries, and other data coming to you for whatever special services and product that you offer from your side, basically. And eventually, last 7 8 years of time, we found that there are a lot of those devices, mobile, which provides us a lot of enriching data, right? Means the location data, the lot of sensors that are getting into. One is in our watch and our mobile, and a lot of those devices now coming in IoT, basically. So apart from what data you have, what data that you are collecting, what data you have been generating, so in the process you also generate data, what data you are sharing and receiving, you are also getting a lot of enrichment coming from all other devices, basically. And that's the paradigm we are in, basically. And this paradigm, uh, we know there are some organizations which are kind of front-ending or front leader in terms of their experimentation of the data. And most of the social media company falls into that category, but all of us are making certain level of plan. And as a Data Security Council of India, we are membership the sector, and being a member, corporate members, basically a lot of those digitization plan, innovation plan do get shared with us, basically. And then we understand that somebody like in oil energy sector as well, and power sector as well, basically the kind of digitization that plan which has been making, the significant amount of the personal data that is being thought of collecting and processing basically. And I was surprised to see that I was in one of the power sector organization, and they were saying it probably will be falling into significant data prodigy, which probably we have not until now thought about. Largely, we thought about technology companies, internet companies, or BFSR to a certain extent, health sector, or anything which is in B2C collecting personal information. But power sector means we have not thought about key. Um, they will be falling into category of significant data prodigy, and that's what uh, the current age is basically of data action basically. And all of those things that we have been planning to do from now, and this particular decade is called as the emerging decade, or sometimes this decade is also called as decade of critical technologies. And most of those technologies we are finding ways to uh, uh, getting them into the enterprise ecosystem, like a metaverse, Web3, AR, VR, robotics, AI, ML, then blockchain, IoT. So all of those technologies that we have been looking at, and these technologies are there, but the kind of interfaces, kind of architecture model, kind of cloudification of those technology basically. So because of that, it's really become easy for us to make use of this technology. And these technologies are becoming more intuitive in nature to manage basically. They are able to create and generate more data basically, and more importantly, they are helping us to becoming more personalized in terms of offering our product and services. Each product and service that we are offering is becoming more data enriched nowadays. And while doing that, we are also relying on some of the models. Like, for example, we are relying on platformization model. If somebody else is managing the platform, and we have been trying to use that platform to provide the services. So this entire discussion of privacy, when it comes with the data, personal data, identifiable data, and now we know the when we talk about privacy, we talk about largely three things. One is the content principles of the privacy. When then we talk about the enforcement structure for the privacy, and sometimes we also talk about the country's position and some aspects of the data privacy. For example, uh, the applicability, the definition process, definition of data, the data residency. Some of these requirements comes as the country's own position. So largely privacy, when you talk about conceptually, it is into three different areas: content, country's position, and the enforcement mechanism that you create for the privacy basically. So when all these are being devised, and this we all know that different country treat personal data or privacy differently. Basically, for in case of US, until now, at least at a federal level, it's more like a consumer protection. In Europe, you will know that it's more fundamental right, and we also had seen in India in 2017 that Supreme Court had underlined privacy as a fundamental right for all of us, basically, right? And then that makes the uh, privacy to the level of other fundamental rights that we probably enjoy. And when we see that the legislative process that has followed out of it had gone to a lot of those kind of uh, uh, exchanges in last 4 or 5 years, we have been trying to define, notify, discuss about the privacy law which is coming in. There are multiple versions, and there are two key versions that we see. The last time the version was quite significant, almost 155-page document, and now we have 26-page document basically. So what that tells us is that in countries like India, with billions of population or billions of different way data can be collected, data can be processed basically in millions of different way basically. And then there are a lot of those plays, right? And these plays are one, certainly the way we had been collecting, processing personal information. Other part is the privacy is fundamental right. Then how exactly you need to operationalize privacy. But the another place in the last 5 6 years of time, there is also a lot of success stories that we are able to create, not only at Indian level but global level as well. So this digitization and digital platform initiatives that we have, especially in the context of all the Aadhaar, starting with Aadhaar, UPI, then now we are talking about DigiYatra, then we are talking about UHID. So this entire architecture-driven digitization story, and because of that, the kind of transaction that we see in kind of fastest digitization that we have seen in different areas of a life space. That's one part. And secondly, the kind of digital product industry which has evolved in last 5 6 years of time. So that also, and then also the by the through that the serving millions and billions population, right? So if you just look at a revisit on 31st of December, if you just try to look at all those kind of product companies, the kind of orders that they got in one day, basically, right? And the kind of transaction that is happening, basically. Every month we have been now seeing UPI transactions are crossing 8 billion number of transactions, 9 billion number of transactions. So such kind of a uh, uh, architectural intervention plus the digitization that we are seeing. So that gave us certain level of confidence that probably we need to balance it out, digitization, legitimate use of data with respect to the privacy and personal life that is coming in, basically. And this particular bill is a reflection of probably those uh, evaluations which we have seen in last 5-6 years of time, and probably also a kind of reality check in terms of what we can do in privacy. And there is also learning which is coming from somebody like GDPR, what kind of challenges create a ground level, basically. So we see this bill is trying to address the need of the country, need of the economy, need of the startup, need of the industry to collect and process information, basically. But while doing that, there is also all of us as we also wear the hat of the industry, and we are also have the professional. So while trying to solve the issue, is it not now probably creating a regime which probably is not as stringent as we expect this age would be, basically? Is it not that uh, uh, the expectation that is laid down on liabilities that it creates, basically, is it not really trying to, when you try to solve the problem, probably there was a one extreme that you tried to do in last bill, and now we see other extreme in terms of making it more easy for implementation. So some of these discussions that we are having in last, I think, 3-4 months of time since this bill has been out, and on the backdrop of that, we are celebrating this Data Privacy Day, and we know that uh, uh, some years back we used to struggle for a security and for privacy, the commitment and those sponsorship and those kind of attention given by the policymaker, by the leaders, by the executive management, by the board member. But we don't see that struggle now. We see now board had been coming actively to understand what is it. Executive management is quite worried. Some of the things have happened with this ransomware, and because of that, I think there's significant awareness that we see about the subject of privacy, basically. So some of those challenges, this is awareness, commitment, sponsorship has been definitely gone out, but now is a matter of nuances, basically. The privacy is now a matter of nuances. The nuance level of discussion is one part, but more importantly, taking these nuances for implementation is another part, basically. So now the things has come to the level of implementation. Things has come to the have those deliberations which can help us to understand this better from the context of the organization environment. How do we take it for implementation? How do we take it for the operationalization? How do we use this kind of expectation to revitalize the process that we have devised until now for the collection processing of personal information? How do we bring that to design of the some of the new ideas, new product that we are thinking for the collection and processing personal information, basically? So now the discussion is now getting more nuanced, more implementation centric discussion, more compliance centric discussion, basically, and also innovation centric discussion as well. How can we use these obligations and liability? On other hand, we have volume and velocity of a data that we are collecting, processing, basically. How can I use innovation engineering to take care of the privacy obligations or requirement in more scalable way, basically? So this is what the discussion now coming into place. And in today's discussion, I know we will not able to cover all of those facets of the discussion of privacy, but some part, for that matter, we definitely want to discuss about its deep consent, because that's very much discussed in last uh, 3 months of time, basically. And we also want to discuss about the role of DPO, because now we are implementation of privacy in organization ecosystem. So that's the second thing we'll cover. And we really thankful for all the speaker helping us to put up that agenda and exhibit that agenda for today's interaction. But as we had been talking about, so this Data Privacy Day celebration, we want to continue this for the next 2 months, and as every year we do. There's already privacy wallpaper screensaver that we had set up, and probably most of the people until now have been using this policy wallpaper as their wallpaper for the organization um, celebration of the privacy, basically. So please feel free to use that wallpaper. We had also created infographics in privacy. We had would be with this event. We'll be doing many more such kind of event in next 2 months of time. There's a privacy quiz, privacy poster. We also have with the government of India, MyGov, we also set up a privacy pledge. You can take the privacy pledge. And there will be a lot of campaign that we'll be doing as a part of this. And for all of this engagement, we are really thankful for HDFC Bank, QRC, and Seqrite to help us set up and provide us the bandwidth support for doing this event. So I look forward to really join you all to celebrate this Data Privacy Day with all the speakers and all the audience here, and welcome you for this interaction today as a kind of commencing interaction for this celebration. So this I hand over to Shivangi. Thank you all for joining and being part of this celebration today.
Thank you, Vinayak, for really setting the tone for this event and shedding light and elaborating on the evolution of the privacy landscape, privacy tech. Before we commence with the sessions, just very quickly, I'll hand it over to Sukrit, who's the Senior Manager of Marketing here at DSCI, to briefly introduce our partners who are supporting us in the organization of this event and throughout our broader campaign. So Sukrit, over to you.
Thank you, Shivangi. And like Vinayak mentioned, we are looking at privacy from a much more deeper impact area view. But at the same time, we are also aware that privacy is looked upon by the larger community only when there is something wrong that happens with us. And that is where awareness becomes the most critical area to focus on. And as a result of that, we are doing this campaign, a 2-month-long campaign, where we have been blessed by partners joining us in the form of QRC. So Vamsi Krishna has joined us in this panel today itself from QRC. Then we also have with us Rahul from HDFC Bank, and we also have Ashish Pradhan, who's the CTO of Seqrite, a quick heal organization. So I will go with one by one on each of them, inviting them to join us and share a few thoughts. So I would request Vamsi to join us and share a few thoughts. Vamsi, if you can join us, please.
Yeah. Hi, Shukrit, and hi, Vinayak. So, thank you very much for this great opportunity to be, as a support member in this event. Really, it is a fantastic initiation from the DSCI because even though we know information security is so many decades, but the privacy is something, it's a newborn baby. Like, even though the fundamentals are there still, but the awareness is not exist in the, it's a every citizen of the data. Like, when I look at the privacy, it is for me, like, it's not like the security things, which is technologically, or maybe the top management only look after that kind of things. But privacy is every fundamental right for every citizen, every human being. So it is for us, for everyone. But yes, the kind of awareness, particularly, it should be there, but it's not there. Last few years, we are talking about the privacy, and I know this is a very baby. We are very in terms of the privacy, we are just started our journey. So obviously, this is the kind of awareness, the sessions and the initiation that DSCI taken. It is a fantastic initiation, and we are very proud and we are pleased to be part of this and by supporting DSCI. Also, I have gone through the infographics and the screensavers and everything. This is one way of, we are giving back to the community, and we are like the DSA, and definitely only one request is that, because the information security is so popular in across all the ways, but the privacy is still the professional. Because tomorrow, if the government of India, if they approve that act, whatever the digital bill, then definitely I have only one small thing is that, are we equipped with that kind of a professional manpower or the resources who understand the privacy in a ground level? That is one of the big question. I know DSC is having couple of the training programs in that, so that is just one thought process. But yes, we are very much happy. Thank you very much for this great opportunity. We are looking forward to participate such kind of more activities in future. And yes, from the QRC point of view, we are already started, we are basically the certification body for the privacy information management standards. So that is how actually we linked up with the privacy already. I mean, there is a ISO standard, the way 27001. There is a called 27701. That is the ISO certification management standard, which is a global standard. But I hope how it will interlink with the local level regulations, like whether it is in India, whether it is other countries, how it is linked up. That is something which we can probably think of in future. Okay, thank you from this great opportunity, Mr. Shukrit and Vinayak. So thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vamsi. Now I would request Ashish Pradhan, CTO of Securite, a Quick Heal organization, to kindly join us and share a few thoughts.
Sure. Hi, good morning. Securite basically is the cybersecurity solutions, enterprise solutions division of Quick Heal. We have solutions on zero trust, endpoint protection, data privacy, and many other areas that a lot of government agencies and commercial enterprises are using. So before I go further, I just want to call out Vamsi and tell him thank you, because he may not remember, but few years back we have actually taken his services in implementing, strong privacy controls in the software that I was building. And a lot of my knowledge and realization of this is not as simplistic as it is kind of comes from the consulting that we actually got from his organization. So Vamsi, thank you about that.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you.
Great. I think overall information security talks a lot about loss of information, talks a lot about damages that can be caused by loss of information and everything. But in recent times, I think more and more focus has been given on the privacy aspect, where primarily you have to start thinking about what kind of data do you want to share, how do you want to retain it, how do you want to classify it, how do you discover any kind of duplication copies of data that may be floating around in your organization and gain control over it. So the whole process is kind of evolving, getting mature. Legislations like GDPR, California laws, I think even our own upcoming laws and everything are putting a lot of stress on the very root of this whole thing, where if you're putting all the information out there, you're just increasing your threat exposure. So I think overall this initiative from DSCI around building this awareness through various campaigns and everything is extremely critical. Probably we are moving out of the Instagram generation where everything being shared has become a habit, and we need to show a mirror to the individuals as well as organizations in terms of actually what gets shared, how do we control it. And I think this is a great initiative, and it's important for people to understand where the whole problem can begin. And we as Securite Quick Heal are very happy to be associated with that and be partner here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ashish. So we have heard from two organizations that is supporting the user orgs. Now let me invite Rahul, who's part of SDFC Bank. He's the DPO there. So Rahul, if you would like to kind of join us and share some of your thoughts of how you look at this situation and the scenario and the campaign.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Sukrit, and thanks, Vinayak, for giving us an opportunity to support DSI in this noble initiative, right? And I heard Vinayak, I heard Vamsi, I heard Mr. Arvind, and I think it's very rightly put up that privacy is something which is very less understood by everyone, but it is very important, like as an individual for myself as well. Because when we talk about data today, people say that data is a new oil, right? But I strongly disagree with that, because data is something which cannot be a commodity. It is something which I own, and I should have right of self-determination of the data, right? So that is how we have to think about data privacy, and that kind of awareness we have to build in the society. And also we have to build the same level of awareness in our organizations, where we help our team to various teams to understand that privacy is something which is not a challenge for you, right? It is something which would help you to do things in a better way, right? So that kind of awareness has to be built, and I think by this initiative we would be reaching out to various communities, to our employees in the bank as well, to get the importance and understanding of the privacy. Also, when I heard Vinayak that it has become board level agenda, so I agree to that, because even in our bank, when I go to couple of board meetings, then privacy is something on top of agenda, right? And the senior leadership in our bank are now talking about key consents and all those aspects of privacy, right? So that is has become a board level agenda, and then I could not I could agree with Vinayak that now privacy is something what we have to look on implementation of it, how we can better implement it. So I think this initiative of DSCI would be not helpful for, means helpful for means we will be supporting to the society, but at the same time we will be also gaining from it, right? That how we can have best practices within ourselves so that we can take privacy to the next level. That's it. Thanks, Sukrit.
Thank you so much, Rahul, and thank you everyone for stepping forward and joining us in this initiative. Being cognizant of time, I would now hand it over to Shivangi to take this session forward with our panels that we have lined up. So Shivangi, over to you. Thank you.
Sukrit, and thank you again to HDFC, QRC, and Securite for supporting us in this event. Without further ado, I will commence with the first session. Our first session is about how to hire a DPO and what the roles and responsibilities of a DPO are. Just to set some context for this session, the reason we decided to pick this topic is because when we were doing our consultations after the bill came out, that was one of the questions that was thrown our way the most by the industry, right? That how do we hire a DPO? What roles and responsibilities does a data protection officer undertake? Where in the organizational hierarchy do they operate, and things like that? So with that intention, we've organized this session, hopefully both to learn from an expert and also for the audience here to be able to learn from him. So without further ado, I'll invite our speaker. For this session, we have Mr. Jagannath, who's the Global Data Privacy Officer at LTIMindtree. Also, just as a heads up, the structure of the session is such: we'll have a presentation by Mr. Jagannath for the first 30 minutes or so of this session, which will be followed by a Q&A. So if you have questions, meanwhile, enter them in the chat, and towards the end, of course, you can unmute and ask your questions. Jagannath, over to you.
Right. I guess I was on mute and I was speaking on mute. Are you able to hear me now, Shivangi?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, perfect. And my screen is also visible, right?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Well, good morning to everybody. I see a wonderful gathering, and I must really thank DSCI for taking this initiative to bring a lot of awareness on data privacy. I've been part of their gatherings and initiatives over the last 1 year. And it's an excellent initiative that they have taken, which really brings a great ecosystem, building an ecosystem in India per se, right? To introduce myself, I am Jagannath. I manage the data privacy office at LTIMindtree, playing the role of the global DPO. So I would be taking you all through what are the key responsibilities of a data protection officer. I'm sure with the India DPDP coming in, this role is going to become that much more prominent, even in the Indian context, outside of the current global context. Well, I've kind of charted the agenda with these following points. Well, I would cover all of them, many of them in brief, so that everybody gets a view on what the role is and how important the role is, right? Being a privacy day, I think I would not do justice if I don't talk a little bit about privacy as a whole. So I would give a very, very brief insight into the journey of the global data privacy world. And many people might be thinking, did we speak about data privacy in India only since 2021, where the PDPP came in and then it was withdrawn and then the DPDP came in? Well, I just want to give you a little insight into India is also thinking or has always been thinking about data privacy for a while. Then I'll step into the role of a DPO, the key activities that we do, and the challenges that we faced. And I also wanted to touch upon cost of compliance and cost of non-compliance, because many of us think just putting in a DPO, everything will be hunky-dory and everybody would know what it is and what not, what to do, what not to do. Well, it's a lot beyond that. So that's how I've structured the session. let me start. So what is data privacy? I think many of the speakers, especially Mr. Vinayak, has covered what really data privacy is about. Globally, it's been called a fundamental right. Primarily, it is to provide an individual the option of providing only the information that he or she wants to provide, right? And be able to manage the information that they provide, and expect the organization that is collecting the information to be transparent and fair in terms of letting the individual know, in our context, the data principal know what information is collected from them, how is it being processed, so that you're being fair and transparent, and of course, ensuring that the data that is being collected is secure and not freely available over the internet. So that's that in a crux. That's what data privacy is about, and I'm sure all of you agree with this definition. Now I'm just switching into the global journey of data privacy. Okay, way back in 1948 is when data privacy is actually recognized in the UDHR, is primarily UN at the UN General Assembly. And then sometime in 1980 came the OECD guidelines, pretty much focusing on trans-border data flows. Okay, which is when the UK DPA came with the UK DPA got into action in '84, and then it got updated in 1998. And 95 onwards, it has really taken a significant leap into how the global ecosystem started looking at privacy, with the enactment of the European Union's directive. And then came the sectoral laws like the HIPAA, which is primarily focusing on the health data, and then the Gramm-Leach-Billy Act, which is in the United States focusing on the financial data. And then the landmark year of 2018 came in, where GDPR really shook the world up and woke the world up, I would rather say, on what really is data privacy and the way we need to look at privacy. And a little history into GDPR, while many of us would recollect 2018, but it's actually been going on from 2012, which is when the draft was proposed and then was approved by the EU Parliament. And 2016 was when it was adopted, and a 2-year timeline was given to for it to be enforced. And of course, I mean, 2018 onwards, I think today we are hearing news about so many privacy laws like the CCPA, which has now evolved into CPRA, then the PIPEDA, then PDPB, PDPA, Singapore, Australian privacy principles, and so on and so forth. I can go on and on and on. And of course, the ones that are currently in the draft stage, there are many in the draft stage, and then they're being debated in public forums and so on and so forth as well. That's on the global front. Coming to India, right? Actually, data privacy is being spoken about since 2000, right? In India, it's not a recent phenomena. Where you had the IT Act, I mean, since 2000, which gave a legal framework for electronic governance, right? And 2008, you got the SPDI rules and evolved that evolved in 2011, and 2017 as another landmark year for privacy professionals, where the Puttaswamy versus the Union India passed the historic judgment of affirming the constitutional right to privacy, which is when a joint committee was formed, headed by Justice B.N. Srikrishna, and who was given the responsibility to come up with recommendations on the data privacy bill. 2018 is when the draft bill was proposed. The draft bill was released around July of 2018, and it was debated extensively. And excuse me, sometime in December 2019, was presented in the Parliament, and then a joint Parliament committee was formed, and the recommendations were provided in 2021, and sadly it was withdrawn. But I wouldn't say sadly, because that actually gave us another new bill, which is the DPDP, Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, which came up in the late 2022, which was shared for public consultation, and now is being debated. So that's the journey in India. I mean, I'm sure many of you are aware of this, but those who aren't shouldn't think that privacy is something new that has come up in India. Now, having said this, right, and setting the context of DPDP, I'm sure all the organizations must be wondering, what do we do? And that's where we are there for, right? A data protection officer. So, and again, it's not a recipe that the DPO will do everything for you. Sorry, I would want to, that's where I want to share. What does the DPO require to do to be successful in the organization? So what's the role of a DPO? Okay, it is to advise and inform the organization of its data protection obligations. So what does that mean? The DPO must be able to understand the law, work with the legal teams, of course. I mean, to understand the law, collaborate with the legal team, understand the businesses. Because if you don't understand your businesses and the functions that your organization does, you would not be able to interpret the law, right? Because the law, once understood, has to be interpreted in an appropriate way. And you need to ensure that you advise your organization by identifying the data privacy risks related to organizations, right? Are you processing the data properly? Are you using the right lawful basis? And so on and so forth. There are so many other aspects to this one. And then you have to implement your policies. Many people think data privacy is about putting data privacy policy and then publishing the policy and then providing the name of an individual for grievances and contact. It goes way beyond that. You need to adhere to the policy. So as a result, you need to put in the procedures together. One of the most important aspects, which really is really called out in GDPR especially, right, and the erstwhile PDPB in India, is high integrity and professionalism. A DPO must report into the board of the organization and must all the communication from the DPO must be black and white. So that's a very, very important aspect of a DPO who needs to have the ability to be of high integrity and professionalism. And once all these are defined, put together, and so on and so forth, you need to enable the ecosystem to monitor, govern, and report compliance. Okay, and then it's your responsibility as a DPO to build a privacy culture, right from the top management through the junior most people. A privacy culture is very, very important. Otherwise, you will not be able to adopt to data privacy norms and regulatory mandates if you do not build a data privacy culture. So what, I mean, I would probably spend a couple more minutes on data privacy culture. Is your employees at the grassroots level should understand, are we collecting the data in a legitimate manner? And that's when you start actually ticking off on data privacy culture. If you have built a successful data privacy culture. When I share my data, are we actually doing it in the right way? Tomorrow, if there is a new application that is being built, they should come to the DPO and ask, hey, you know what, are we building this application in the appropriate fashion, right? Can you sign off on this particular application that we're building? If somebody is processing data on the field, that person should be thinking of, am I collecting this data? Am I overdoing what I'm not supposed to be doing, and so on? And the DPO is the face of the organization, right? Both internally and externally. Internally across the organization, right? And externally to the supervisory authorities, right? To the supervisory authorities, to the customers, to the stakeholders, to the shareholders, and so on and so forth. So DPO is a combination of a lawyer, a technologist, a program manager, and a facilitator. And I would really want to end this slide by saying DPO and data privacy should not be treated only as a compliance. We should actually transform it from being compliance function to a service function. That means we need to provide, as a privacy organization, we need to provide the service to the organization to be able to adopt the privacy framework and the privacy enabled ecosystem. That's the role of a DPO. So what are the key skills that one must look for in a DPO, right? We spoke about understanding and interpreting the applicable laws, right? So that involves that you need to be able to read every privacy law that is coming up, every nuance that is being articulated there, and be able to interpret that across your business functions, right? Having a sound understanding of your businesses, right, and your functions. This is very, very important, because when you come to data privacy, the business always treats you as a roadblock, right? You need to be a facilitator there. Unless and until you understand your business and the functions, you wouldn't know where your data is. You wouldn't know what they are doing with it, and you wouldn't be able to advise them in an appropriate fashion. And this is a very, very important aspect, because the minute you start portraying a message that you are a roadblock to them, your privacy journey will really hit roadblocks every other day, right? And the third one is the DPO should be able to understand what legal basis this means. It could be consent, it could be public interest, it could be so many other factors, contract, and so on and so forth, and then correlate those legal bases to the organization's processing, because this is one of the most important aspect, along with the data privacy principles, to run a privacy ecosystem, because that is what the regulators will look at, and that is where you get actually fined. Not on data breaches. I mean, of course, on data breaches as well. But when you hit a data breach, or when you actually get scrutinized by an external entity, these are the first things that the external entities will start looking at. Are you actually processing data lawfully? Are you using the right legal basis? Are you using the right legal basis as per the law that is allowing you to use it? And then, are you aligning with the data privacy principles? These are two key aspects. And the other skill that you need to look for, this is another very important skill, which is to be able to communicate across the organization and collaborate, right? If you do not collaborate and facilitate, you will never be successful. You will only be a compliance body, and you will only be looking at checklists. You will only be trying to say, you're not doing this right, you're not doing this right. What about this checklist? What about that checklist? That's not the way DPO should approach organizations. DPO should approach organizations in a collaborative and a facilitating way. We, as a privacy function, should be communicating to the organization, helping them achieve data privacy. That should be the mode of achieving data privacy. Of course, that leads us to influencing the organization and building a privacy culture. And this is right from the top. If you do not have the organization's senior management buy-in, bye-bye to your privacy ecosystem, right? It's only going to end up being a compliance journey, and not a very successful journey. So the organization at the highest level should own data privacy and then percolate downwards. Okay, certain privacy laws actually call it out. I think one of the speaker clearly says the privacy, the DPO should report into the board, right? So the GDPR actually calls out the highest level of organization should be involved. And similarly, even our PDPB had that clause, and even held the withdrawn PDPB had that clause, and held the organization's senior most individuals accountable, which is not there in the DPDP right now. And another important aspect is understanding technology. You may not be a guru in technology, or you may not be an expert in technology, but you need to understand technology, because at the end of the day, when you are proposing something, you should be able to correlate to what you're proposing, right? And when you are in discussions with your IT teams and your business teams, you should be able to understand what they are talking about and how you can facilitate in helping them achieve their goals, or achieve your goals or the organization's goals. A simple example could be deploying an encryption algorithm, or when do you need pseudonymization, right? Or when do you need masking, and so on and so forth. Collecting diversity information, and so on and so forth. The list can go on. So you need to be able to understand how to implement and what to do, or when they are proposing a solution, to be able to accordingly judge and facilitate the discussion. And of course, effective program management and effective change management to be able to ensure you build the privacy ecosystem. That's the skill of a DPO. Key activities, I'll really run through this real quick. I've split the key activities of a DPO between data and process, because these are two key aspects that go hand in hand. Without knowing your data, right, and without knowing the lawful basis of processing, you will not be a successful DPO, and you cannot build a successful privacy ecosystem, because you primarily need to understand what data is being collected and what is being processed. I would emphasize on this 5 W's and a H, right? So you need to understand, where is your data coming from, what data are you actually processing, how are you processing, where is it going, who's accessing, and where is it being stored. So an example I would give you in this, a small example, of course, would be, many of them will say, hey, you know what, my application is a homegrown application. It's being built by teams in India, and we are storing the data in India. So then you get into the question of saying, is it a SaaS-based application, or is it a on-prem application? It's a no SaaS-based. We are using Azure, we are using Google, and so on and so forth, AWS, and so on. And then you ask them, hey, then where's your data residing? My data, it's residing in India. What about the backup? And then they start blinking and then they say, oh, you know what, backup could be in the United States or backup could be in Singapore. So that is what I was trying to reflect upon. So it is very easy to come up with answers, but very difficult to probe. So you need to go beyond that. So that's what defines where your data is. And then you validate it against the principles of processing. Are you collecting diversity data where you're not supposed to be collecting diversity data? Are you collecting it too early? Are you collecting it too late? And especially an example on travel would be the travel agent will always want your passport copy. Why do you need a passport copy when you can put it onto a system, and so on and so forth? And you can go on. And understanding the data transfers, especially in global companies like many of ours, we need to understand where the data is moving around, right? Are you collecting European data? Are you collecting Indian data and storing it outside? What kind of data is being stored outside? If it's healthcare, it becomes a lot more important. If it's financial, it's equally important. If it's employee data, you need to understand what is happening with the employee data and so on and so forth, and the kind of applications you're building. So there's a lot. I mean, you may wonder, why should we understand all this? If you do not understand this kind of an ecosystem, your data lifecycle, if your data processing, you will not be able to define a privacy ecosystem or a privacy framework outside of your data privacy policy, right? So that brings you to the next point, which is building an effective data governance framework. So once you know your data, you should be able to govern that data. So what does govern the data mean? Are you actually continuing to use the same principles that you have put together, the framework principles? Are you differing from it? Is there any new kind of data coming in? What kind of risks that your organization is facing? What kind of risk that you could potentially face? Is there a new law coming up with the DPDP coming up? Are there any nuances that you need to keep in mind, and so on and so forth? And of course, contractual alignment. And fortunately, many laws today are calling out the need for data processing agreements. While 2 years, as recent as 2 years ago, only laws like GDPR calls it out, and many other laws really didn't call out the need for data processing agreements. So that's another area that you need to look into as an activity of a DPO. And of course, building an effective data privacy framework. Now, the next key activity is from a process perspective. The process perspective, once you understand your data, you need to define the processes around the data. And there are a plethora of processes that you can put together. Again, the processes are interdependent. You may, again, if you are a multinational company, you need to ensure that your processes also align with the outside regulatory norms while you're actually looking at the Indian data regulatory norms and so on and so forth. So some processes that I can call out are overall data processing policies, retention policy, data classification policy, what is sensitive data, what is not sensitive data, how you're going to look into sensitive data. I think one of the speakers spoke about consent versus notice. Where can you take consent? Where you need to provide notice? Is it deemed consent? The new DPDP is talking about deemed consent. What is deemed consent? Define deemed consent. Don't use it liberally, and so on and so forth. And of course, the data subject rights management, the PDP, we had a lot more on that, but the DPDP has diluted it. But then nevertheless, you need to understand that. Government access, where can government access? What are the procedures that you need to adhere to? And the contractual framework and technology implementation, right? When you bring in new technologies, when you bring in new application, when you bring in new portfolios into your organization, you need to understand that they all need to imbibe data privacy and then be brought into the organization, which is primarily leads to the privacy by design culture, which is a huge topic by itself, right? And you have to continuously assess your ecosystem. It is not a one-time activity of building a privacy framework and saying, hey, tick in the box. I put these set of SOPs, these set of processes. I know where my data is. I have my data inventory, and then that's pretty much it. No, it has to be continuously assessed. And how do you do that? Using internal audits, external audits, certifications, and so on and so forth. Okay. And again, I'm sure everybody understands in this world incident management and data breach management. I don't need to speak about it at all. Very, very, very important aspect. And last but not the least, the training and awareness. Unless and until your organization is geared up to understand what data privacy is and what they contribute to the privacy ecosystem, you will not be able to fulfill or build a effective privacy framework. Okay. And again, it's best to align with the certification. There are so many certifications available. It's best to align with the certification, which will primarily be used to guide you in your journey of data privacy. Now, what are the challenges? I mean, everything looks hunky-dory. Wow, it's a huge list of activities. I need a 5-member team, and then we're all out to build a excellent privacy framework. So what do we do? Of course, there are significant challenges that you will need to cross. Firstly, is the senior management ownership of the organization support, without which it's only going to be on paper, right? So this is very, very important. That means you need to sell data privacy to the senior management and bring that sense of ownership with the senior management, right? Who will then percolate the organization support. Balance between business interest and compliance. This is what I was talking about. You should never become a roadblock. That is why I was talking about compliance to facilitating journey, right? To providing it as a service. And then when you start shifting gears in such a manner, then you actually will increase interest from the business front and enable them on compliance. Ineffective governance. If you do not govern your privacy ecosystem, you will see many activities slipping through the cracks. Sensitive data processing. Everybody thinks we can process sensitive data very easily. Just take consent and process it. Sorry, I mean that's not really how it works. There are certain jurisdictions where you can't even process certain type of sensitive data like diversity data. Right? There are certain jurisdictions that you need to take additional consent, and first initial consent is not needed. Cannot be taken for granted. New technology implementation like AI, machine learning, and so on and so forth. When you start performing automated decision making, there are additional steps that you need to take. So these are the aspects that you need to get involved. Technology teams will have their exposure, but will not be able to take it to that level that you want to take it to. And being abreast with change, not able to identify what data you're processing, and effective collaboration. These are the typical challenges that a DPO would have that you need to encounter. And shift to cost of compliance. Well, DPO's role looks pretty interesting and there's lots to do, but what is the actual cost of compliance, right? I split it into 4 parts. 1 is the organizational commitment, 2 is knowing your data, 3 is technology and tools, and the last but not the least is governance. So senior management time, definitely a significant cost of compliance. People, budget, policies, and drafting the policies, putting the processes together, program management, change management. It's just not you who will be driving it. You will need sparks across the organization who will need to invest time and so on. Collaboration and facilitating in compliance, contracts, redrafting the contracts, ensuring the contracts are adhering to an appropriate vendor management process. And there is cyber insurance as well. So that's a significant cost of compliance. Well, certain jurisdictions now are actually talking about insurance companies not willing to provide insurance coverage for data privacy and cyber as well. So those are things that you need to keep in mind. Knowing your data, significant effort, significant amount of time, tools, purchasing on identifying where your data is, right? Reducing the clutter because we are so used to collecting data. There is so much of data that is not needed. And it is a significant cost that will come into the picture when you're actually reducing clutter, right? Again, processing tools, if you have to purchase tools and so on and so forth. Coming to technology, enhanced security controls. I mean, you have to look at effective DLPs, forensic tools, data classification tools, data labeling tools, if you want to build an effective ecosystem, privacy ecosystem, investing in PETs, privacy enhanced technologies like encryption technologies, masking technologies. Are you going to do data element level encryption? Are you going to do database level encryption? And would that accommodate into your applications, enhancing the applications? Today, you might have built so many applications that probably are not aligned with appropriate data privacy principles. So you need to enhance those applications. Costs come in there as well. And implementing data retention, which I just spoke about, and governing. At the end of the day, the cost of compliance influences external consulting, audits, external law firm consulting, certifications, continuous monitoring, and so on and so forth. So, what is the cost of non-compliance? Right? You might be wondering, cost of compliance. Oh my God, so much. I mean, I thought it was a lot easier than this, but you need to keep in mind. But at what cost? Cost of non-compliance. Are you willing to take a cost of data breach? Significant. I mean, cost of data breach is not only regulatory fines, it's enforcement action, reputational damage, loss of business, and so on, and organization time. The amount of time that is spent by the organization, right, is significant on data breaches. And of course, being non-compliant with the law attracts every lawmaker in the industry and globally, right? And it results to, at the end of the day, customer compliance and contractual regulatory commitments, right? Knowing your data, if you do not know where your data is, how are you going to align with your regulatory compliances, right? Are you actually validating your data? A lot of people know sometimes many a times we realize that you know where your data is, but if your data is not correct, that is also resulting to a cost of non-compliance, right? That's another very important aspect. The need for newer technology implementation. Whenever there's a need for newer technology implementation, privacy is one of the key aspects that you need to look into. So the cost of non-compliance will hit you later when you actually need a privacy professional looking into implementing new technologies. Okay. Managing incidents, I spoke about significant and inaccurate data, and governance, of course. Ineffective governance will result to all these other aspects that come into picture, where you start, then you need to involve external consulting, certification, and so on and so forth, which will pretty much double your cost of compliance because of the result of non-compliance. And again, one emphasis I want to really bring out is a lack of collaboration. Really will result to no result, right? The collaboration between the CISO team and the DPO team is one of the most important aspects. Collaboration between the GC team, general counsel team, the lawyers in your organization, and the privacy professionals is very, very important. And similarly, across the organization. So just to summarize, well, we spoke about the evolution of data privacy. We spoke about the role of data privacy, skills, key activities, challenges, and the cost of compliance and non-compliance. With this, I'd like to end this session. Again, a very happy Data Privacy Day to all the privacy professionals and my peers who have joined and who have not joined across the globe. I'm willing to take questions now.
If there are any questions from the audience, please feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourselves and ask your questions.
Hi, I'm Neha Bakshi. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to know
Hello.
more about.
Yeah, I have a question.
I think Neha is asking the question. Can you please wait ready? After Neha, you may ask.
Yeah, so I work for SBI Cards. So I was looking for more insight on the concept of and scope of privacy in Indian market and the consent importance of consent in the Indian market.
Yeah, the scope of privacy in the Indian market, of course, it's evolving, right? Now, since you spoke about a bank, of course, one of the most important jurisdictions or not jurisdictions, most important industries are bank and healthcare and retail. These are three key industries that contribute to a lot of data, consumer data. Definitely amongst the highest in demand. Now with the PDPP, with the DPDP coming in, scope of privacy is only going to increase. And of course, there are a lot of rules that will come in after the final version of the DPDP. And those will only enhance the need for data privacy in the Indian ecosystem. Well, if PDPP had, the erstwhile PDPP had come in, it would have implemented so many other nuances, but I think it's a great start with the DPDP coming in and then evolving over time with the additional rules that will come in. Definitely a very positive outlook for privacy professionals because globally, approximately around 150 or 440 plus countries across the globe are either having privacy laws or talking about privacy laws. That's how privacy has evolved, especially in the recent times. And your second question was on consent. On what alignment of consent are you referring to? Because yes, consent is one of the key lawful bases that is being used, and India relies a lot on consent.
So, do we have a particular law like for the consent part? Like, how important is consent, taking consent in Indian market? Like in GDPR, it's very important, we know. But what is the significance in Indian market?
There's a lot of significance in the Indian market. I mean, pretty much every law talks about consent. I mean, if you talk about IT Act, if you talk about SPDA rules, they call out consent very clearly. So consent is one of the key aspects, and DPDP also refers to consent as one of the key lawful bases. The other lawful bases are existing. Like I mean, they could be deemed consent, they could be general consent. I think the next section is actually going to be talking about consent. So I would not want to eat away from that session. So maybe you should park your question for that, or you will get your answer in the next
Yeah.
question. But I can,
Yeah,
I mean, I can obviously tell you a lot more about consent, but I would rather wait for somebody who's waiting in line to speak
Yeah,
about consent.
absolutely fine. Yeah. Okay.
Reddy, you had a
So-
question.
Rajesh, go ahead.
Awesome, good.
Yeah, hi. So this is my question is regarding like general public, like in India, we see that people are not concerned about giving their information. So how do we like what government or what agencies are doing to make people aware about their rights, about their data? Because we as an Indian, we can give any data, any information, any of our information for maybe if somebody is giving some something free or something like that, but we don't know the value of our data. So what government and agencies are doing to increase this awareness among people?
Thank you for the question, Rajesh. I would let Mr. Vinayak answer the question, but nevertheless, I'll just make a small mention of it. I think awareness is very, very important. We as privacy professionals also should bring that awareness to people who are collecting the data, to people who are actually giving that data, speak about it in larger forums. You're absolutely right. And you just walk into an apartment complex, that person will ask you for your phone number, and your phone number is your identity card to your entering into an apartment complex, or your car registration number. And with that, anybody can go and get all your personal information through the available apps. You're absolutely right. In India, it's a long journey, but just to give you a small example, when GDPR came in, I was actually in Europe talking about bringing awareness in the organization to process data in an appropriate fashion. When I went into the immigration authorities, when I actually walked into, I think it was in Germany and the UK, in fact, both the countries, nobody even knew about GDPR. I mean, when we speak so big about GDPR, I think it's the reason why I'm quoting this example is people. It takes time. It takes time for any government body to actually propagate this information and bring awareness through different schemes. So we are in the same shoes as I was seeing when GDPR came into picture in 2018. So yes, it's definitely a challenge, and I think we as privacy professionals also should enable this awareness and bring awareness. At least we start within our organization, sensitize our colleagues, saying that hey, please don't provide personal data very easily, and extend the awareness to the larger ecosystem. Mr. Vinayak, I mean, you want to add something from a government perspective that'll help, please?
Yeah, so if you look at government's role is largely to create because at the end of the day, key role of government is for the rights that we are getting in terms of the privacy. So creating those obligations and liability is something the government will try to do, right? Yes, there are some government initiative which does talk about awareness, but largely the role is to create an obligation, liability, and expectation of privacy. And through that, they would like to govern the way the personal data is collected and processed, basically, right? There are some initiatives of government of India for that matter. There is under G20, there is definitely one initiative on overall awareness, and there is a privacy certainly coming as one of the important area for the awareness piece. So largely, this awareness is to taken care by the industry plus seriously member like industry body like DSCI. So we all have to contribute, and privacy professional like all of you, basically, we have to contribute for creating awareness in a privacy space, because this space as had been discussed, we probably have very higher tacit level understanding of privacy, but as we discussed that the nuanced level understanding is very important because the things has come to the level of implementation, to level of compliance and significant level of obligations and liability now. And that is why we probably need to contribute for spreading more awareness to community basically and professionals working in privacy.
Thank you, Mr. Jagannath and Vinayak. Thank you. I think I just wanted to just bring awareness about the people who are here, that like we all have collective responsibility of increasing this awareness among us people. And thank you guys.
Sanjeev, you had a question, please go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Jagannath and the DSCI team. Thank you for this presentation. Was very useful and helpful, definitely, for the organization like us. I am Sanjeev Lamba and belongs to Uno Minda Group, which is into automotive component parts manufacturing. And just wanted to understand from your side, as the bill is yet to come, so what actions we should initiate today to be ready when the and we are not into panic. We or anybody in the industry is not into panic. Thank you.
Very good question, Sanjeev. Thanks for asking that question. It's good to see the proactiveness and the eagerness to ensure that you want to be ahead in the game. I think that's definitely a great attitude that every organization should have, rather than wait for the bill to come and then figure out what we want to do. Well, I think if you ask me, what should you do, is definitely one of the key aspects is knowing where your data is, right? I think that's one of the biggest challenges most of the organizations will have, because data is very freely available and very freely shared, especially in our country. Knowing where your data is very, very important. And reading about the law is also equally important, because even if there is a change between 2022 and 2023, the draft version that came out in 2022 and the most likely version that will come out in 2023, it will be an incremental change. It will not be a sea of difference, right? So reading the law and understanding the law and ensuring that you are better prepared when it comes in. For example, simple could be consent. Are you really taking proper consent? Where are you using deemed consent? What other lawful bases are you looking at? Are you collecting excessive data? Are you collecting data from different jurisdictions? Will it impact you? And so on and so forth. So there's so many privacy frameworks or checklists available freely. It's easy to adopt one of those frameworks, at least to be prepared. I mean, you don't need to use that framework to establish your privacy ecosystem, but make a start. So knowing your data, knowing where your data is, and what you're doing with that data is very, very important. Putting that structure together and understanding the law and the recommendations of the law will keep you better prepared for when the law actually comes into reality.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Kiran, you had a question. Please go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for a detailed outlay of the GDPR and other details of the regulatory aspect of this data protection. I had a question wherein the bank has, I keep getting spam calls of 3 to 4 calls from random numbers saying that you have a loan, why don't you transfer this from multiple banks? How can this data be, including my name, my phone number, and loan partial details, be shared with other financial institution without my consent? That's my question.
Absolutely. Very good question. I mean, we all go through that experience ourselves. So that is where these laws become very important. All right. When these laws come into picture, while these laws are targeting digital data and larger companies, data fiduciaries and significant data fiduciaries, these things will change slowly, right? With the ecosystem that we currently have, it is a little challenge. It's definitely a challenge that we are encountering. because the data is given freely. So I think one of the most important things that we as privacy professionals can do to facilitate this misuse of data is not to provide data freely, right? Today, when I go to a store and that person says, can you give me my phone number? And I said, no, why do you want my phone number? So they say the billing will not work. So they need to figure out a different way. So at least that awareness should start creeping into people who are actually collecting this data. And of course, the larger companies will need to take a lot more nuances in terms of ensuring the data that is kept safe and it is not being sold easily. And which is what these new regulations that are coming up, like DPDP, will put hold towards it. And like I said, it's going to be it's not an easy answer. It's not an easy fix. It is going to take time, and it will evolve slowly with these laws coming into effect. Anybody else wants to add to the question that Kiran was asking? Please feel free.
We have one question from Manu in the chat. They're asking what is the process to certify destruction of data once the purpose for which it was collected, that purpose has been served by the organization. So how do you certify that the data has actually been deleted?
Great question. In fact, there are different ways of certification of such data. Well, first and foremost, before deleting the data, you need to ensure that you actually want to delete that data, because there are so many sectoral laws that actually come into picture before you delete data. And it depends on the kind of data that you are actually holding. Depends on the kind of data that you're holding, and depends on the processing activities that you do with that data. Well, after looking into these sectoral laws and after looking into the retention timelines of the data, then you go ahead and delete the data. There are a lot of tools that are available. For example, SAP ILM. I mean, if you're a large organization, you typically use SAP for a HR system. The information lifecycle management is one of the key data retention tools that you can use, which will actually look into the data retention and do a hard delete. It cleanses the data between three different stages. One is it puts it into the archive. Two, it actually deletes the data. And three, it produces a certificate of deletion, hard delete certification when you can't retrieve the data anymore. So that is one of the tools. There are so many other tools that are available in the market for deleting structured data, deleting unstructured data, and of course, providing you the certificates of deletion.
I think that's all the questions we had. Thank you, Jagannath, so much for a really enlightening session. This was really useful for me personally as well. I'm quite interested in figuring this out. So, you really covered the whole gamut of the roles and responsibilities, cost of compliance, cost of non-compliance. This was really useful for me and for the DSCI team, and I'm sure for the entire audience as well. So thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. And again, wishing everybody a happy Data Privacy Day, and thanks DSCI for this great initiative.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Jagannath. So for our next portion of this session, we'll be walking you through the Data Privacy Day campaign that DSCI has organized this year, as well as the Privacy Pledge. I'll hand it over to Amit, who's the Senior Manager in the Communications team here at DSCI, to take this forward.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Amit from DSCI. It's a pleasure to be here. Just give me a moment while I share my screen. Shivangi, is my screen visible?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, sure. Okay. First and foremost, happy Data Privacy Day to all of us and to every one of you who is present here. As Vinayak, Sukrit, Shivangi have already mentioned, and other guests here, that this year, every year we do a privacy campaign, which we typically run for Privacy Week till the Safer Internet Day. But seeing in the light of the recent developments, and this year we also we decided to undertake a longer campaign, a 2 months campaign on privacy awareness. And most of the items under the campaign will cover both aspects for the citizens as well as a lot for various organizations as well, where they can sensitize their employees on various basic tenets of privacy, how to take care of customer data and stuff like that. We have kickstarted the campaign, and first and foremost, we would also like to thank our supporting partners, HDFC Bank, QRC, and Securite, for helping us make this campaign possible. So if you see my screen, this is the privacy screensaver or wallpaper that we say. This is primarily based on the theme. The theme we have chosen for this year is Think Privacy First. So we want to instill this sense of importance of privacy in every individual's mind, be it an end user, a consumer, a citizen, or even an employer. So or their employees who handle customer data. So the wallpaper is a basic iteration of the classic snake and ladder game, which shows how, if you make the right moves, you can get ahead in the game. So privacy is actually an enabler for business and not a hindrance. So the idea behind this wallpaper is the same. We urge you all to visit the campaign page and download the wallpaper and apply it for a week to 10 days at least, and share the message of privacy, or or show your support as solidarity for the Data Privacy Day. Next, so we are also going to create a lot of infographics. These infographics will be based on various data privacy topics, subjects, and events. So we have began with 2 infographics for now, which are already available on the campaign page. So they talk about, they basically give you a brief decoding of the draft bill which has come out. So we thought it is a good point to begin with, and hence the first 2 info, it may not be very visible over here, but definitely once you download, you will get the high quality PDF versions and shareable versions as well. But this typically generally gives you an idea. We have tried to cascade into 2 points. What does the bill tell for businesses and for individuals? So we have tried to like put it out in a more visual way. To whom does it apply, and what all compliances are there, and what all what kind of business help it can bring you around. So this is the primary idea, and for the infographic. And the individual, the other one is also is more of an individual specific. These are for end users. They can know under the bill what are the various rights that they have been guaranteed, or they will be guaranteed, if I may say, and the various aspects where they can have their right to correction, erasure, and stuff like that. So this is more from an end user perspective, but also equally important from organizations to tell and aware their consumers about the various rights that they have. So also, we are also going to do a lot of poster series under this campaign. This is just a beginning. So this is just a visual representation of a couple of them that we have started beginning up with. As we go down in the campaign in the coming days, you will see a lot more posters coming up, or these more infographics. Just to mention, like, we are already in the pipeline of working on a infographic for the various roles and responsibilities with for the DPO. I think with the great session that we have by Mr. Jagannath, so we will collate his inputs, and we'll get to put out some more content which will be typically useful for our stakeholders as well as our various community users. So apart from this, there is also a data privacy quiz that is being organized. So this is almost live on the website. You guys can go and play. There are prizes also to be won. I hope you all find it enjoyable, as well as these are good, easy, and simple ways to also make it to learn various data privacy concepts and various other elements. Then, like every year, we also have a data privacy pledge. This is mostly from a reaffirmation point of view. I would like to urge that you share it more and more among your community, even among your family and friends and everyone, so that they are all abreast with the very basic tenets of privacy, because it starts from an individual, and when each one of us will partake in it, we hope that privacy will reach to a better level, and a culture of privacy will be instilled among us. So just to quickly give you a glance, we have other assets also which we have created over the years, previous DPT versions. Some of them are still relevant. You guys they are all accessible on the same web page. You guys again can go and download them as well. If you feel something is still relevant, you can share them. And all of them are available at this link dsci.in content data privacy day 2023. You can also scan the QR code if you may right now to directly land up to the campaign page. So I'll just take stop for a couple of moments in case you want to scan. And I think we have also posted the link in the chat section. So if you want, you can click the link and visit the campaign page right away. And before we end the day, once again, we thank our supporting partners, HDFC Bank, QRC, and Securite. And just as a moment of what do you call solidarity, we also have this pledge. So I will just take this opportunity that we all reaffirm our commitment towards privacy. So I will just play this pledge before I wrap up and give around the walkthrough for the campaign. I hope you all will utilize all the elements that we are creating and we will create in the days to come. I hope the campaign serves value to your customers as well as your community, as well as employees and everyone. And we all think privacy first.
Thanks, Amit. So thank you for walking us through the entire campaign and also, showing us all the different infographics that we've developed at DSCI. Hopefully, like Amit mentioned, you all find it useful. Without further ado, I'll move on to the final session that we have planned for this day on responsibly managing deemed consent. Now, this is one of the topics that was highly debated after the bill came out. This was a new concept rather that has come out, which wasn't there in previous versions of the bill. So there was a lot of discussion and deliberation around whether it's a good idea to have deemed consent as a ground for processing of personal data. What are the challenges that could emerge both for organizations and from a privacy perspective for data principles? So without further ado, I'll invite our speaker for this session, Mr. Arvind Sivaramakrishnan, who is the Chief Information Officer at Karkinos Healthcare. Arvind, over to you to start with the session. And again, to reiterate, please mention your questions in the chat, and we'll also have dedicated time for audience interaction towards the end.
Mani, I hope my screens are visible.
Yes, your screen is visible and we can hear you.
Good morning, everybody. It's a fine, sunny Saturday morning, and I definitely see some of our friends in Delhi cuddled up. So while it is warm in this part of the country, deep south, still a warm greeting to all of you and greetings to all of you on the Data Privacy Day. Absolute pleasure to talk to you. My name is Arvind Sivaramakrishnan and I'm the CIO at Karkinos Healthcare, and I'm also the Secretary for the College of Health Information Executives, the India chapter. Understanding consents in the context of privacy, and I heard the questions before, and I also heard Shivani's introduction that makes it a little more difficult, but I'm going to start with a few thoughts and a fantastic session by Jagan. I'm going to replay some of the words he mentioned. Compliance to service, privacy by culture, cost of compliance, that means that there will be a spend on compliance, ownership, and facilitating the journey. Knowing data when it translates to information. I'm just replaying a couple of words because we're going to be talking about these words, what they mean, and getting to the subject of consent, informed consent, and the derivative of informed consent being deemed consent. And I understand everybody is getting hassled about it in terms of this a new thing that's going on. So let me try my best to demystify and reduce the angst of informed consent and deemed consent. And without getting into too much of, whether it's informed or deemed, let's understand the construct of all of this. So that's really what I'm going to attempt to do. Do keep your questions coming. And I'll try to do my best in getting a response to that. First, acknowledging the content of whatever I'm presenting today, which itself is a debatable topic of informed consent versus deemed consent, because I'm using all the DSCI knowledge base, which is available to all of us to use, and I really would encourage all of you to please look at the DSCI privacy framework, the best practices, and of course I represent the healthcare sector. So for many of my colleagues in the healthcare sector, and for those of you who are also interested in the sector, please look at the DSCI sectoral guide on healthcare too. All of this available on the DSCI website. And my acknowledgements to DSCI for allowing me to use these. Let's also keep that word in mind as we talk about consent and deemed consent. I want to start off with basics, and a lot of all of this is familiar to all of it, but I really want to reinforce concepts of the basics to ensure that we really understand what we are up to in the larger gamut of consent: the data controller and the data processor, the entity that jointly determines versus the entity that processes information. I want to know what I'm the organization. I want to run a campaign. I want to run an initiative. You are helping me and I'm giving you a task, and you are a processor and I am a controller. I understand the why of it. And because I am the controller and you're working on behalf of me, and thereby you are not part of the total why. And all of this is going to make significance to the question that one of our colleagues and friends asked on. I get a lot of messages on my credit card information from banks and all of that. And now start putting things into perspective. How is the data process, the means of data processing, and under the instruction of the controller? The why, the how, the what comes with the data controller, and the mechanism, the machinery, the tool that is going to be used, which may be an agency person, so on and so forth, are data processors. And then let's now look at the data applicability for the privacy principles. Who can do what? Notice, consent. Two important words. And we'll go through the definitions of collection limitation, use limitation, access and correction, obviously security, disclosure to third party. Those are the wonderful SMSs that keep ringing day in and day out, sometimes even at night. Preventing harm, that aspect of goodness, data used for goodness and the wellness of mankind. And are we taking that word too far? Preventing harm. And accountability, without diluting it into not my problem mentality. Notice, choice and consent are very, very important aspects of it. Now let me get into informed consent, and I'm also going to get into definitions in terms of this. But let's get into the more easy, I shouldn't say easy, I'm sorry, the more well-known part of it, informed consent. Clear, affirmative, and unambiguous. Clear, affirmative, unambiguous. That means that it's not hidden in Chevron where you click on a plus and a font -0 content starts opening up and then runs to pages and pages. And you have to scroll all down and press an I agree. And that is not clear, clearly not affirmative. Getting into informed, the combination of affirmative and unambiguous, into informed, specific, and we just spoke, we just had a question on that of specific, the purpose for which a particular data was collected. And Jagan was mentioning, he goes to a shop and somebody asks for his phone number and they say, my billing will not work. I don't think there's a reason between my phone number and your billing. That's no reason to provide that information in the aspect of a consent. And freely given, that means given by the will of the person consuming the service. I'm going to try my best not to cloud ourselves with complicated words like data fiduciary, data principal, data processor. I'm not a lawyer, I'm sorry. Let's keep it in language that all of us think we can, understand better. When a consent is specific, clearly worded, for the nature of purpose of what it is taken for, clearly describing what it would entail in a manner that the person giving that consent is able to completely relate to it, understand it, and thereby discharge it, is what we are looking at by calling it an informed consent. That means you understand what is going. Now let me get into some definitions. Notice, consent, purpose limitation, collection limitation, and use limitation. Privacy is a pretty heavy topic. So let's take it with an example that possibly all of us can relate to. The wedding invitation is your notice. Okay? Your parents, your friends, that's your notice. I'm getting married, guys. That's your notice. And then the actual wedding ceremony, you take thee in sickness and health, or the Vedic functions that happen, or the thing, the kubul, whichever be the belief that you have. That is the consent. And that consent is an informed consent. And now, friends, let me introduce the word deemed consent. When at a wedding you're taking that informed consent, buying vegetables, cleaning the dinner table after dinner, dropping the kids at school, helping in homework, attending the parent-teacher meeting, are all deemed consent that you take when you are signing up for the informed consent. I don't want to rake up a controversy here by saying that that informed consent was not very clear in language and specific. I will leave that to the elders to decide, but that is a daily example of notice, consent, and deemed consent. Jokes apart, the essence of what we are looking at, and thereby attaching importance to purpose limitation, the purpose for which a particular consent is being sought, and the collection limitation as to what is adequate and relevant, and the designed intent of usage, which is the use limitation. But then as we go into the topic of deemed consent, we will also talk about how all of these start blurring borders with other considerations, raising obviously certain concerns on misuse of that information. But that in essence is the fundamentals of the privacy principles in terms of notice, consent, coming together with understanding around purpose limitation, collection limitation, and use limitation. In the context of use, when it is informed versus deemed, where it is derived from. And we will get into deemed more, but derived from. And that's really where we are trying to get to. And now let's understand what's going on. And I really want this to happen because I know the Digital Data Privacy Protection Bill has come in and we've been talking a lot about it, but please understand, law apart, privacy and our commitment towards privacy is an act of responsibility. Long before the Puttaswamy case on the right to privacy and right to information and all of that, this is an act of responsibility, law or no law, irrespective of the industry segment we are all working on. I work in healthcare. That means people are trusting us with critical information that belongs to their personal health that needs to be handled with responsibility. A banker, somebody is giving information related to their wealth, their economic status, sometimes good, sometimes not very good, and sometimes really bad. It's an act of responsibility of dealing with it and not passing it on to the next credit card provider to tell you that there is a 0% APR scheme going on with font -0 of disclaimers there. It's an act of responsibility. And this act of responsibility throughout the world, in many places, have been implemented as law. In our country, so far it's the IT Act, the amendment of the IT Act and certain amendments that have gone on to it that are loosely worded, which is why that Digital Data Protection Bill comes into place that puts it into a more formal structure. But friends, let me assure you that this whole subject of consent, informed consent, in the context of using information to provide a service, and thereby the responsibility of privacy from the person providing the service and the person consuming the service, and the social, economic, and stakeholder construct that exists around all of them, is not new. While the enforcement of law on the subject may appear to be new because of the more digital nature to which all of us are getting to with information. I will make a controversial statement. Some of the Gen Z will not like me for making the statement. You share your pictures on Instagram and you post it for public without figuring out your privacy settings on whether it can be viewed by friends or whether it can be viewed by public. Now that starts becoming public domain information because it's available to large public, and you did it willfully. Did it willfully does not equate to understanding the consequence of what you are doing, and thereby the need for the consent to be put in simple language so that we understand the consequence of a certain exercise, and thereby we are more educated in decisions we are making, we are more mature in decisions we are making, and we are more informed in decisions we are making, and can seek advice that is not ambiguous, that can be directly stated. And that is really action to consent. Consent translating to service, responsibilities of the service provider and responsibilities of the direct and indirect stakeholders who are part of this regime that ultimately come together in the context of privacy or consent and managing all of that herewith. Informed patient consent. Again, key considerations: freely given, unambiguous, indication of the data subject's wishes that signal an agreement to processing their personal information. Clearly signaling that please process my information for the service that I'm desiring. In language that is clear and straightforward, which is what we are calling as clear affirmative action. Affirmative, positive worded thinking so that it's not double worded with meanings that can be inferred. Straightforward sentence no double meaning, no alternate inferences from that single piece of sentence. That is very, very important. And then you express that consent that may not be practical for processing in all limits, and thereby start getting into alternate topics in terms of how we deal with it in the event of certain eventualities that may be faced. You're asking for my information. I'm going to again give you an example, controversial, non-controversial, forgive me, but my intent is to make a point for thinking, not to rake up controversy, so pardon me. Somebody is, let's say, an accident victim on the road. You go around to help him. You see his phone. You're able to access the content on the phone. Okay, I'm not going to talk about strong passwords here. Let's bypass that. You go, you access his phone, you see a phone number and you call. This was an act of emergency, unknown, wanting to help through his device. There's no consent here. We're getting into a difficult zone now of the right thing to do versus infringing privacy. The act of infringing privacy has to be thought of beyond what we consider reasonable use. Reasonable use. Again, another word that can evoke several amounts of criticism and interpretation that can be taken everywhere. Reasonable use, and that is where lies the very thick definition of reasonable use not taken outside context. I gave the example of an accident victim trying to contact for help. This is not a situation where you're browsing through his phone to get other information. Reasonable use stops at helping and being constructive in that process and not really taking it for other infringing activity. Reasonable use, again, my friends, the word reasonable use in the current bill has been used many times. The intention is good, but the English of it allows you to have a free interpretation of it, which possibly could be taken out of context, and that is where some more clarity is required. But let's continue with the intent of what we are trying to achieve, and then we'll get into the controversies. Now, when we understand the elements of a consent, understanding and awareness, and these are checklists. Again, like I told all of you, all these content are available in our DSCI material. It's just me collating all of that to make a presentation to all of you. So these are available for use and ready use, and all of these are available. I did see that our colleagues in DSCI had put on the links on the chat window. The role of the consent. Role of the consent itself. And what is the nature of the organization's willingness to assume responsibility? I go back to Jagan's term in terms of taking compliance and translating it into a service. That's where you're looking at taking a consent and translating it into a service, and then getting into the role of it so that it is not misused beyond the purpose limitation, use limitation, and collection limitation. Reasonable usage. And that is where all of this comes into perspective, and the criteria for consent. I understand when we talk of criteria for consent, this is where we can get into consent fatigue. Because for everything we're trying to ask a question. And guys, again, the word reasonable, and I'm stuck on the word reasonable. And we're going to talk about criteria for consent in terms of the specific criteria for which that process or organization is getting that information. And are we taking consent out of context in terms of overburdening every act with a consent and thereby diluting our fundamental responsibility for which our service is dependent. Again, I represent the healthcare sector, so that means the act of providing treatment. In the name of consent, are we limiting treatment? Are we delaying treatment? All these are not reasonable. And again, going back to my initial statement, this is not part of the act of responsibility. The act of responsibility is beyond constitution. It is human and culture to a larger extent. I do sound philosophical on it, but we are human beings, and the act of responsibility on criteria of consent and the role of consent for reasonable usage, direct and thereby deemed, need to be understood very well. And the channels and the types in which a consent is obtained, whether it is implicit or explicit, offline or online, electronic, so on and so forth, in terms of the categorization of the transaction that you're dealing with. And that means that one shoe does not fit all. One consent does not fit all. I cannot enter one organization, have one consent and do anything under the sun after that. No, it is not like that. At the same time, not translating this into a consent fatigue. And there, my friends, I get into really understanding deemed consent, where a consent can be extended to the larger aspect of reasonable for a decision-making aspect. At this point in time, I would call all of you to please refer to section 8, page 9 of 24 of the draft Digital Personal Data Protection Bill 2022. I'm taking information from there and replaying it here. I must congratulate the government on trying to make this document as simple to read and as direct to read without being a high-grade eloquent lawyer. This is written in simple language that all of us can understand, read, perceive. And maybe on the hindsight, because it is simple for all of us to read, we are understanding this, and thereby the questions are more. Let's think on the positive note on that front. The bill as such does not define deemed consent. There are many people who obviously think that this is borrowed from the Singaporean jurisprudence, and it mirrors some of the GDPR's alternate grounds of processing. It's nice to make comparison with Singapore and the GDPR and HIPAA in the United States, so on and so forth. But let's understand the intent. The intent of this bill is to protect the citizens and the rights in our country. And as many good things that we can learn from other people, good things that we can learn from other people and map it to applicability is really what we are looking at. The bill recognizes explicit grounds when the data principal is said to have given consent for processing the personal data. Very powerful sentence, very powerful sentence. And privacy advocates allege here that deemed consent may violate, and this is interpretation, whether legitimate rights will be flouted, any public interest in processing for that purpose, reasonable expectations, fair and reasonable purpose as may be prescribed after taking into consideration. So the deemed consent, when you read it in section 8, does look at fair and reasonable purpose. Fair and reasonable purpose. I'll give you another example. Again, it will evoke a lot of negative reactions. Please forgive me for that. That's not the intent. My intent is to make a point. In our driver's license, we have the organ donation information, whether somebody consents for being an organ donation in the event of an unfortunate accident. Organ donation. Now, when the patient is brought into the hospital and the identity is reasonably established that this is this person, and they're able to see that organ donation, and the patient unfortunately is going towards a stage where they might be brain dead, and thereby the options of revival become almost close to nothing. Can the healthcare institution start initiating activities on organ donation? I know I've opened a can of worms here, but let's understand how we are bringing the whole picture together with a greater good, respecting an individual and still treading very carefully in the zone of explicit consent versus deemed consent. My intent of saying all of this is also to explain a circumstance, not to rake up a controversy, but explain a circumstance. And that, my friends, is why deemed consent is good, and deemed consent is also being taken in a manner that could be a little dangerous. There are considerations that we need to make around deemed consent. And my examples here are going to revolve around the healthcare sector, but I'm sure you will be able to relate to this. No matter the consent model, the general public and healthcare professionals need to operate within a trustworthy and transparent system. Trustworthy and transparent system now facilitates the right and appropriate use of informed consent versus its derivative of deemed consent. Trustworthy and transparent system. I took the example of the healthcare. Available, valid even for banking, valid even for hospitality, valid even for travel, valid for automotive, valid for the power industry, as Vinayakji was saying in the beginning, all of it. Clear objectives are important. And this is where we are able to actually make that reasonable word actually meaningful and not it. To bring in more context, to have an expansion of scope and bring it into content. Let's not think that way. Clear objectives are important. Having a trusted program. And I gave the example of organ donation. It's a difficult topic. It starts becoming an emotional topic. But I want you to understand circumstances under which these can become vitally important, where we need to handle it. And unfortunately, if a system does not have the foundational trust, deemed consent could be an overarch by the system more interested in transplanting organs than treating severely injured patients. My friends, I made a very powerful statement, controversial, but this is where the act of responsibility in terms of informed consent to deemed consent in a trustworthy and transparent system to achieve an objective is not misappropriated to get into a very bad segment of transplanting for the purpose of profiteering that is not structured. You can understand all the bad things that can happen, and still you can understand the countless amount of good that can happen. Organ donation is an example. That, my friends, is a perspective of how we look at consent, informed, deriving into deemed consent, translating to outcomes that are within reasonable usage. And I'm using the word reasonable consistently in line with the bill, and reasonable only to hammer around the point that we have to do this. Can this definition be better? I think yes. In the current context, it is loosely worded, but having an operating structure that brings discipline into all of this will really bring meaning and effectiveness to how we operate in a deemed consent model. Thank you, my friends, for a patient hearing. I'm open to questions now.
Usual, if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand and we can call you out.
Between now and lunch and a topic as deep as deemed consent, I think it's food for thought.
Absolutely. Anil, you have a question, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Arvind, for an enlightening session as usual. I'm a great fan of yours and I follow your work. A small question from my side is, you have elaborated related to, informed consent versus deemed consent. Up till now, people were following with regards to any organization, be it IT organization or be it healthcare or any service providers, especially from tourism standpoint. Does it correlate or differentiate as a deemed consent versus informed consent while processing the data for the tourists?
See, really, consent is consent. An individual is an individual, irrespective of his nationality, race, or any other demographic profile. So it is very important that we treat every individual on our soil and respect that privacy. There is no differentiation between a citizen and a tourist in any aspect. And thereby, during an informed consent, it is good to also specifically state what could be a situation where a consent could be extrapolated, like epidemic, emergencies, sudden activities and all that. So it's good to do that, but it is not good to differentiate a person as a tourist versus this. An individual is an individual, and especially in a country where we always say Atithi Devo Bhava. I think the moment we say Atithi Devo, I think the answer is clear that we treat them with the highest sense of responsibility.
Great answer, sir. Thank you so much. In cascading to that, another question is that how do you really define from a contextual standpoint whether it is a reasonable use and unreasonable use? Because the offender and the defender will always fight and argue, and in Indian context, typically the argument continues but nobody wins, because we know in in our country there are lakhs of cases which are still pending. Now, how do we avoid getting into that situation?
God willing, Anil, I think that with the DPD bill coming up, there will be some level of structure put into it. And here, I think all of us need to change. The moment you get into the word reasonable, it started off because the service that was intended was kept so diluted and fluid that was open to a lot of interpretation. So every service needs a good definition of the nature of service, its consequence and its derivatives. And when doing that, when we have that clarified, then the judgment around reasonable that is taken in an emergent situation will be better ratifiable, as opposed to free for interpretation and thereby, to your point, never get to a closing and just have arguments with no outcome. I would not even want to say winner, but I would want to say outcome. And that is where clarity helps. And that clarity also gets into ensuring that that service is completed for the purpose and we are not shirking responsibility and accountability to it in the name of consent, the lack of it. I think that amount of clarity is what's going to change the industry. We have to get into that time, age, and era, and God willing, the DPD bill will take us there.
Great, sir. Thank you so much.
This question from Vasant.
Yeah, my question is to DSCI. Basically, about a lot of countries have started this privacy seal, privacy stamp, and privacy certifications for applications, websites, and know the which process personal data. So, how far we are from achieving that, like issuing certificates or seals, so that we evangelize privacy by design and privacy by default for all the applications and what we are processing.
Yeah, thank you Prasad, for asking this question. We are near to that because you know the days probably had been working for last 1 year for that, and this this quarter we're doing. Anybody would like to offer their websites for doing the pilot, we'll happy to do those pilots with the seal program that we develop, and we will do in a way that is more ecosystem way of doing things. And this quarter we are doing pilot, and probably next quarter we'll launch it for the larger public as well. Actually, so for this quarter we are looking for doing pilot in different sectors.
Thank you, Vinayak. I think we'll connect with you and we'll participate in the pilot. Thanks a lot.
And on behalf of DSCI, if I may say so, the privacy lead auditor course and the privacy courses that DSCI runs are not just informative, but also really put people in a good perspective on how they need to run that for an organization. Back to Jagan's point of how to run a DPO. So definitely those are worth looking at. Of course, it's there on the DSCI website, and as a consumer of that, I would vouch for it.
Thank you, Arvind. So I just added the links to those certifications also in the chat. If somebody wants to pursue, you may please refer to that link.
In the interest of time, I think we've really hit the time limit now. So we'll wrap up. Thank you everyone for joining today and taking out the time over the weekend. Thank you again to our sponsors, QRC, Securite, and HDFC Bank for this. Happy Data Privacy Day to all of you, and stay tuned as we release more content and more initiatives come out over the next few weeks as part of our larger campaign. So yeah, thank you everyone.
Thank you.
I guess somebody has raised the hand, so if you could just put your question on chat, we will try and respond to you offline.
And that was Vasant.
Vasant, yeah.
Ankit, I saw Ankit also raising hand, so that's why. So I can keep the session on for a few more minutes for people to write their questions. We'll answer them offline. So for everyone else, no holding back. You may please continue with your weekend, and thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining today.